YouTube, what the crap's going on? HeirofCarthage here, and I'm going to be rocking Morathi in some online play here. Some of you have been asking me about Shades for the Dark Elves, which are a hybrid missile/infantry unit, and I've brought a lot of them here just for fun. So when in Rome, why not get a whole lot of them? So yeah, I've got 4 units of standard Shades. Actually, are they the Shades? Yeah, I've got 2 Shades with great swords, which they excel at both melee against armored units, and they have anti-armor missiles. And then I've got 4 units of Shades, which are good against unarmored infantry, but good against armor. They're good against unarmored units in melee, and they are good against armored units at range. So my opponent has brought a very elite High Elves army, which I personally think is a huge mistake considering the army I've brought here. Maybe he was expecting me to go heavier on like monsters or something. I'm not really sure what he was expecting, to be honest. He has 4 Phoenix Guard, which is an insane investment, and he's got 3 Lothern Sea Guards with shields. So we're about to see whether or not those shields or armor can help the High Elves. And you can see that I unleashed an extremely punishing volley. And again, this is a Phoenix Guard, and then here I'm going to use Morathi's Pit of Shades to start pulling apart his skirmishers and forcing his line apart. So I'm going to use Morathi to really harass him and hopefully draw some attention while my skirmishers win this fight. And you can see that although I lack range, the hitting power from Shades is extreme, especially in the numbers where I'm at. So what my opponent needs right now is a lot of infantry or cavalry to tie down my Shades. And honestly, certain infantry would be decent, but we'll talk a little bit more about Shades. But if he stays back at range like this, he's just going to be playing right into the hands of my Shades, and that's what he's doing. He wants to try and use his Lothern Sea Guard, thinking that he's purchased himself missile supremacy, but he absolutely hasn't. Shields or not, the armor piercing and the damage coming off my Shades will easily take down his Lothern Sea Guards. But you can see I focused 2 units of Phoenix Guard are already dead. He's going to send in his Noble to try and do some disruption, but I'm going to use my Cold Ones to block. He's only managed to take down mostly 1 unit of Shades here at the loss of 2 Phoenix Guards and heavy damage to a Lothern Sea Guard. So he's going to pull forward with Tyrion and his Lore Master of Hoeth and his remaining units. So now I'm going to bring in my... I have 1 unit of Dread Spears and 1 unit of Blink Swords. This is just going to keep his units busy while my group of Shades continues to do their work. And you can see that most of my Shades are still alive. And I'm going to now pressure his Sea Guard with my Bleak Swords, which are just cheap fodder. This Phoenix Guard, if it pursues me, it dies. If it ignores me, it dies. Basically, it's just going to die. So yeah, my opponent is in some pretty serious doo, except for right here, that was a pretty good play. Tyrion's Sunfang, I think is what it's called. It's going to be his really only decent weapon against me right now. So I decided to shoot at his Lore Master for a second, then I decided that's a waste. I'm just going to tie down his leadership here with my Cold Ones. I'll just sacrifice him. I already sacrificed 1 unit of Cold Ones because it went crazy. This is just more of an opportunity for me to wipe out Phoenix Guard, and this one opened up its flank, and it's going to get hit by a Pit of Shades. So Morathi has also been very active in destroying units. She's taken out a bunch of Sea Guard, and I've been able to use Soul Stealer. Pit of Shades is such a beautiful spell. Look at that, how quickly we melted a Phoenix Guard. At this point, my opponent is just almost entirely out of his elite infantry, and all these Phoenix Guard here couldn't hope to defeat 2 Greatsword Shades plus all the others, and I haven't even stopped firing yet. So my opponent's inability to stop my Shades from firing was an instant death sentence for him here. The army I have is going to be very squishy against the right build. The good thing for Shades is that they do pretty well in combat, but they have to get a few good volleys off with their missile weapons to have a chance of winning in melee combat. So as a hybrid, the best way to defeat them is to get some distraction in while you charge your infantry or cavalry in. And otherwise, these units can do extreme damage if given the time, and you've witnessed that here. 4 units of Phoenix Guard just absolutely melted, gone. And then the Lothern Sea Guard were partly decimated by the Shades, and the rest of the way by Morathi, who has 80 kills now from her antics. I'll explain to you the spells that I used with her whenever we get to the in-game screen so that I can better explain it. But again, here, the Cold Ones The bleak swords, the dread spears, all these things are just distractionary. They're just meant to kind of hold and give my shades more time to do their work. You can see here that we're absolutely murdering this Lore Master of Hoeth. So he's taking a lot of damage. He's a tough unit, though. This cat's shielded with 90 armor. He's been a tough unit to hit. Plus, he gets a little bit of protection while he's fighting because he's on foot. Morathi, I'm just powering up her magic, and I have no reason to land a Morathi at this point unless I'm forced to, so she can stay perfectly safe in the air. And the idea here was that if they had brought a dragon, which is definitely one of the specialties of the High Elves, that my shades would be able to melt a dragon out of the air pretty quickly. Again, the best way for my opponent to defeat the build I have here would be to get very rushy, very quickly, and to hope that his units, again, beautiful, beautiful Sun Fang there from Tyrion. I think it's called the Sun Fang. We'll double check that name on the way up. Tyrion. Yeah, Sun Fang. Yeah, nice Sun Fangs from my opponent. Nicely done. He has 84 kills on Tyrion because of it as well. But yeah, Tyrion just gets absolutely massacred. The Noble and the Lore Master is going to be the last one standing, but it says Pyrrhic victory, but that was pretty much a High Elf massacre at that point, an absolute massacre. And it's because my opponent basically ended up, this is honestly the first time I've tried this, and my opponent picked not a good counter army to what I had here. Granted, he probably wasn't expecting these type of antics. I've run into some pretty shade-heavy Dark Elves army a couple of times. I've had success against them so far because I happen to be using the Lizard Men, and I was able to get dinos all over them very quickly, and that is one way to shut it down. I would be very wary of using this army against the Lizard Men. It could work, but I would think that it's rather dangerous. But again, the purpose here was Morathi is kind of bait up in the air. She could lure in flying lords or monsters. The shades then melt those things. High-tier infantry units become an instant target for these kind of things. If your opponent, as the High Elves, has a lot of long-range archers and they spot you early, you're going to take a lot of damage. And you may not be able to pull this off. But if, in this case, for instance, your opponent has a few elite units thinking that they can stand off against something like this, it won't work. The elite units will get absolutely throttled. So these Sea Guard with shields, definitely good units, but they're actually not really meant for a standoff kind of fight like that against armor-piercing missile infantry. They're better for kind of holding their own in melee combat. That would be, I think, a better use of them. But let's go into the custom battle screen, talk a little bit about some of the specifics of this army and why I did what I did. So in terms of spells, I brought 4 spells, which is more than I normally bring, but it was to give me a little flexibility based on what the situation called for. So Melkoth's Mystifying Miasma is a cheap way to do some damage to an enemy unit, so that's why I brought it. Pit of Shades is a blob killer, plain and simple. So you use it to either take out a high value asset of the enemy, so like a Phoenix Guard, or a blob. That's where you place this, and it does a lot of damage. It's a stationary vortex, so it can be used to good effect, although its area stays limited. So you want to use it, again, on a high value target or a blob. This Power of Darkness does damage to whatever you cast it on. In this case, I was casting it on Morathi. You can cast it on one of your other units, and it does damage to that unit, but also gives you huge increase to power reserves and recharge. That's why I was able to get 2 Pits of Shade, Pits of Shades, sorry. And then I also had a Soul Stealer, so you can see the amount of magic required to do that. That's 26 mana, and then 18 here, plus cast this twice is 4 more, so I mean, I got to use a lot of magic throughout it, and that's where this spell can be handy. It's tricky. If you use it on Morathi and it does damage and she can't gain that damage back, you're in trouble. But if you use it to help build up for a Soul Stealer, for instance, she can get all her life back while sucking life away from an enemy, so it gives me that flexibility. I was also using this Heart Render and the Dark Sword. This basically is great to stack with her other ability over here, which is this one right here, Enchanting Beauty. If you stack those two, it takes away 18 melee attack, and then 9 melee defense if you keep her in the presence of nearby infantry. So my goal was, if all these shades ended up in a fight, I could park Morathi over that fight and take away a ton of melee attack, thus increasing the chance that my shades would be able to complete their mission. And again, these guys were just throwaway units, just to have on the flanks to support the cold ones, because the high elves can field some nasty cavalry, stuff like dragon princes. So that was the reason why I had infantry on the flanks to potentially support the cold ones. But you also notice when I deployed my line, I deployed the cold ones immediately behind the shades, because the shades have the stalk ability. They're vanguard and they have stalk, which means that they're not going to be visible unless the enemy's done some scouting. So that's something that you gotta, be aware of. So my cold one's just kind of sitting right there. If my opponent, for instance, were to come charging forward thinking there's nothing there, he might charge right into a volley from 6 different missile units. So let's talk a little bit about the shades themselves. Both shades and great sword shades and dual weapon shades. There's 3 varieties of shades here. So shades with dual weapons, and shades with great swords. Let's talk through the difference. All of them have the exact same missile damage characteristics. They have very high missile damage, and it's got very good armor piercing. Any unit is going to just get absolutely hosed if they take continual fire from shades. They have 18 ammunition, which is enough to do a lot of damage. There's only 60 entities per unit on large settings. So what that means is despite these guys' good melee stats, they're not going to have a lot of men in the unit. So if you look at something like this Bleak Swords, it's 90. So you have a third less in this unit, or 50% more, depending on how you want to look at it. 50% more in a Bleak Sword than you do in a Shade unit. So just think of it that way. They are going to be good, but you have to do damage with your volleys before you were to get into melee combat. So if you look at what each one of them can do, Shades, the standard variety, you kind of have to look at it as the cost is combining a unit like Bleak Swords with a unit like Dark Shards. And see, that would be 1,050. I can get 1 Shade that is cheaper than the 2 of those combined. Can it do the job of both? Possibly. It depends on how well you can use it. So that's, I think, one of the things to be aware of. So again, the Shade is going to have to do the damage before it gets into melee. But if you look at the stats, 34, 30, 28. So over here we've got 40, 32, 30 with 16 charge bonus as well. So the Shades do better in melee than the Bleak Swords, but there's fewer of them. So again, the missile damage has to be done. And if you park Marathi over them, then it kind of takes away even more capability from your enemy. So Shades with dual weapons, which I did not use in this battle. These guys are similar to the standard Shades, except they're going to get some anti-infantry bonus, which means that they are still going to be most worthwhile in melee against unarmored units. They can fight armored or unarmored with their missile weapons, but when they get into melee, they get extra bonus versus infantry, which means that these guys are going to do even better versus those units. But similar stats to their standard brethren, just improved attack and the bonus versus infantry, or sorry, improved defense, and then they have the bonus versus infantry. Now, the best variety here, the Shades with great swords, these guys are meant to be more like a Swordmaster of Hoeth or a Harganeth Executioner, but they also have a missile weapon. That means they're going to sacrifice, obviously, the number of men in the unit, and they're also going to sacrifice a little bit in terms of melee stats, but they're still going to come packing a massive wallop with 40 melee attack. 32 defense is okay, but 36 weapon strength with the armor piercing is going to be quite good. Their charge is not that good. So that's where they're going to trade off a little bit with those other high-tier sword units along with the numbers. But again, if we take a look here, just for kicks, let's bring just standard Lord or Dreadlord here, and what we'll do is a little test. So let's bring a Shade with great swords, and on the other side, I'm going to put a Harganeth Executioner. We've taken all the abilities there, and let's just do a quick test. Both these units cost the same, by the way. So the real question here in the end is how many volleys can the Shades get before clashing in combat with the Harganeth Executioners, who will obviously dish out far more damage when already in melee. So let's go ahead and put these Shades here, and we'll put our Lord here. I'm going to take my Lord off fire at will, but they're going to park their Lord right in the middle of their infantry. Let's see what happens. So can the shades with great weapons, or great swords, do enough damage to defeat the Hargoneth executioners? Let's find out. So opening salvo, pretty solid damage done. The salvo continues. We should be able to get another and possibly even a third, and as the range gets closer, they'll do even more damage to the Hargoneth executioners. Let's see if we can get another volley. Oh yes we can. Look at that, we're already down to half health. Maybe another. If they get another, then this is going to be an absolute slaughter. Oh, they're skirmishing. If I would have taken skirmish off, I do think they would have gotten the final volley. But let's go into melee and see if they can finish the Hargoneth executioners after having done all that damage. I'm going to throw my Dreadlord into combat just to kind of help check their Dreadlord. You can see the Hargoneth executioners are dishing out some major pain in combat, so that's why the shades have to get their damage done early. They are fewer in numbers, and they are inferior in stats. They have better melee attack, roughly the same defense, and less weapon damage, and less charge bonus. These Hargoneth executioners are pouring it on. So yeah, you saw how torn up they were. Now remember though that the Dreadlord's in here, and he's doing some damage as well. So that's skewing things just slightly, but you can see that the shades with great swords are capable of defeating a Hargoneth executioner. Headlong, and that's not a huge surprise. This is an ideal scenario where the shades get to fire as much as they want. You can see that, again, they are quite capable in melee. Leadership, obviously, is probably different between the two as well, which I didn't cover. Look at that, man. They actually deal some decent damage when they get in here against this Dreadlord, too. So, definitely an impressive performance. Shades with great swords are a tough weapon, or a tough unit. I think in campaign, they're a no-brainer. They'd be fantastic. In multiplayer, they're expensive. Then again, so are the Hargoneth executioners. So you could think about what each one might offer you. The Hargoneth executioners are going to be a little more sturdy, a little greater in number, whereas the shades are going to be a little more flexible at giving you a multi-purpose unit. So that's kind of the way you have to think about it. So hopefully this gave you some good info on shades. Definitely a cool unit that the Dark Elves have access to. Now there is one more variety that's similar to shades, but it's not a shade unit. It's a Black Art Corsair with hand bows. So this is going to be good in melee against unarmored units, and it's going to be good with the missile against unarmored units, but you can see that its range is much more limited. However, it can fire whilst moving. So we'll have to take a look at this one on another day to get a look at it. So just to get a feel for whether or not these units can be potentially worth it as well. Hope y'all enjoyed this one. HeirofCarthage signing out for now. I'll be back with more Warhammer 2 videos soon.